The forest was alive with the sounds of nature, its rhythm a familiar lullaby to Eldar's ears. He moved easily through the underbrush, his footsteps quiet on the forest floor. His eyes, weathered from years of living outdoors, scanned the terrain, taking in the familiar landmarks. The trees seemed to lean in, their branches tangling overhead to form a canopy that filtered the sunlight. Eldar's hands, calloused from years of manual labor, moved with practiced ease as he navigated the dense thicket. He was a man of the forest, born and raised, and he knew its secrets. His boots, scuffed and worn, carried him forward, his eyes fixed on the path ahead. As he walked, the rustling of leaves and snapping of twigs underfoot served as a gentle reminder of the forest's presence. The wind whispered secrets in his ear, its soft voice a reminder of the mysteries that lay hidden within the trees. Eldar's heart was at peace, his spirit soothed by the familiar sounds and scents of the forest. But on this particular day, something was off. The forest seemed quieter, the silence oppressive. Eldar's instincts, honed from years of living alone, prickled with unease. He slowed his pace, his eyes scanning the terrain with a growing sense of unease. That was when he heard it, a faint whimper, carried on the breeze. Eldar's head snapped towards the sound, his ears straining to pinpoint its source. The whimper grew louder, more insistent, and Eldar's heart quickened its pace. He dropped his gaze, his eyes scanning the forest floor, and that was when he saw it, a small, furry shape, matted with mud and blood, whimpering in terror. Eldar's heart sank, his stomach knotting with a familiar dread. He'd seen this before, many years ago, when his wife Alara had disappeared into the very same forest. The memories came flooding back, a wave of anguish crashing over him. With a heavy heart, Eldar approached the injured cub, his hands outstretched in a gentle gesture. "Sure, little one," he cooed, his voice soft and soothing. "I won't hurt you. You're safe now." The cub's eyes, red-rimmed and full of fear, locked onto Eldar's face, and he could see the desperation there. Eldar knew in that moment that he was not just a simple woodsman, tending to a wounded animal. He was a guardian, a protector, and the weight of that responsibility settled heavy on his shoulders. As he reached out to touch the cub's fur, Eldar felt a shiver run down his spine. The forest, once a sanctuary, now seemed treacherous, filled with unseen dangers. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that he was not alone in the forest. Someone, or something, was watching him, waiting for its moment to strike. Eldar's heart pounded in his chest, his mind racing with the possibilities. He knew he had to get the cub to safety, but a part of him was hesitant to leave the forest, fearing what might be lurking in the shadows. The cub's whimper grew louder, more insistent, and Eldar knew he had to act. He gently scooped up the cub, cradling it in his arms, and began to make his way back to his cabin. As he walked, the trees seemed to loom over him, their branches creaking ominously in the wind. Eldar's senses were on high alert, his eyes scanning the surroundings for any sign of movement. He knew that the forest was full of secrets, and he was determined to uncover the truth behind the cub's presence. The sun was beginning to set, casting a golden glow over the forest. Eldar quickened his pace, his heart racing with anticipation. He knew that he was taking a risk by bringing the cub back to his cabin, but he had no choice. The cub needed his care, and he was the only one who could provide it. As he approached the cabin, Eldar could see that everything was as he had left it. The fire was still burning, the flames licking at the stones in the hearth. He smiled, a sense of relief washing over him. "Welcome home, little one," he said, his voice soft and soothing. "You're safe now." The cub whimpered again, its eyes fixed on Eldar's face. He knew that it was scared, but he also knew that it was going to be okay. Eldar carefully set the cub down on the couch, where it let out a sigh of relief. He watched it for a moment, his eyes filled with a sense of wonder. "This is going to be interesting," he said, a smile spreading across his face. As he watched the cub, Eldar couldn't help but think about the past. He had lost so much, and yet, here he was, with a new companion by his side. He knew that he had a lot to learn, but he was ready for the challenge. The cub, sensing Eldar's gaze, looked up at him, its eyes shining with a fierce determination. Eldar smiled, his heart swelling with emotion. "You're going to make it, little one," he said. "We're going to make it." As the darkness closed in around them, Eldar felt a sense of peace wash over him. He knew that he was not alone in the forest, and that the cub was going to be a constant reminder of the joy and love that he had lost. But as the night deepened, Eldar began to feel a sense of unease. The forest was quiet, the only sound the distant hooting of an owl. He knew that he was not alone, and that something was watching him from the shadows. Eldar's heart pounded in his chest, his senses on high alert. He knew that he had to be careful, but he also knew that he couldn't let fear rule his life. As he looked down at the cub, Eldar smiled, his heart filled with a sense of wonder. "I'll protect you, little one," he said. "I'll keep you safe." The cub whimpered again, its eyes fixed on Eldar's face. He knew that it believed him, and that was all that mattered. As the night wore on, Eldar and the cub sat in silence, the only sound the ticking of the clock on the mantelpiece. Eldar knew that he had a long road ahead of him, but he was ready for the challenge. The cub, sensing Eldar's gaze, looked up at him, its eyes shining with a fierce determination. Eldar smiled, his heart swelling with emotion. "We're in this together, little one," he said. "We'll face whatever comes our way together." As the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, Eldar felt a sense of peace wash over him. He knew that he had found a new purpose, and that the cub was going to be a constant reminder of the joy and love that he had lost. But even as the sun rose over the forest, Eldar knew that he couldn't let his guard down. The forest was full of secrets, and he was determined to uncover the truth behind the cub's presence. As he watched the cub, Eldar's eyes narrowed, a sense of determination etched on his face. He knew that he had a long road ahead of him, but he was ready for the challenge. The cub, sensing Eldar's gaze, looked up at him, its eyes shining with a fierce determination. Eldar smiled, his heart swelling with emotion. "We're in this together, little one," he said. "We'll face whatever comes our way together." And with that, Eldar and the cub began their journey, a journey that would take them to the depths of the forest and back again. Okay, I'll extend the chapter to be longer, focusing on Eldar's journey and the encounter with the mysterious figure. The chill of the night bit at Eldar's exposed skin as he stepped outside. The cabin, once a sanctuary, now felt fragile and vulnerable against the encroaching darkness. He cast one last worried glance at the sleeping cub, its tiny form a silhouette against the window. "Be safe," he murmured, a silent promise echoing in the stillness. He moved quickly, his senses heightened, every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, sending a jolt of adrenaline through him. The forest felt different tonight. Not just the predictable nighttime shift of shadows and sounds, but something deeper, something unseen, as if the very air crackled with an unnatural energy. He headed towards the clearing, the place where he usually went to think and meditate. The stone in his hand felt heavy with the secrets he sought, the knowledge of what had wounded the cub. He started a ritual. After a while he felt his heart beating heavily. He closed his eyes and brought to mind the cub, wounded, frightened. He thought of the forest, the sounds, the smells. He concentrated on the stone, on the cub, on the need to protect it. The stone warmed in his hand, and suddenly, a cascade of images filled his mind. The fox cub, running, a blur of fur, pursued by something dark and indistinct. A flash of crimson, a glimpse of teeth. Then, a vision of his cabin, the cub's wound, and the terrifying faceless creature in the woods. The image vanished, replaced by a sensation of cold and malice that made his skin crawl. He opened his eyes, his breath catching in his throat. The images had been fleeting, chaotic, but the essence of the threat was clear. A predator, powerful and inhuman, was hunting in the forest, and the cub was its target. He wasn't sure what the entity was, but he knew that he had to stop it. Driven by a newfound determination, Eldar started moving faster, the shadows of the trees blurring into a maze. The forest seemed to be guiding him, or perhaps, manipulating him. He could feel a presence watching, a silent observer. He was being led somewhere, and it felt like something that was beyond his control. He moved quickly through the woods. He could feel the presence of the entity. It was there, lurking, watching. He didn't know how to stop it, and it was terrifying, but he knew he had to protect the cub. He had to stop the evil, to find and destroy it. As he walked further into the forest, the air began to shift. The sounds of the forest grew more intense, a symphony of rustling leaves and snapping twigs and the whispering wind. The moonlight seemed to dim, giving way to the shadows of the trees. He stopped in his tracks. The air was heavy, pressing down on him. He couldn't see anything, but he could feel something lurking just beyond the edge of the woods. He heard the faint sound of rushing water. He turned toward the sound. He had seen a waterfall nearby, one that few people knew about. He approached it cautiously. He could see a small clearing. The water was clear and cascading. He slowly stepped toward the clearing, and when he got there, he realized that it was more than just a waterfall. Standing in the center of the clearing, bathed in the pale moonlight, was a figure. It was tall and slender, with an ethereal quality, a being woven from the forest itself. Its face was obscured by shadow, but its eyes, he could see, glowed with an otherworldly light. It had an air of power. As the figure observed him, it emitted no sound. The world around him seemed to hold its breath. Eldar stood frozen, a mixture of fear and fascination coursing through him. He felt as if his entire life had led to this moment. The figure gestured for him to come closer, and Eldar felt compelled to obey, as if a force was pulling him. He took a tentative step forward, then another, and another. The figure's silence was more terrifying than any threat. When he stood directly before the figure, it finally spoke. The voice was like the rustling of leaves, the murmur of a stream, the whispers of the wind through the trees. "You seek the truth, Eldar," the figure said, its voice echoing in the clearing. "You seek to protect the cub." Eldar could only nod, his throat too tight to speak. "The forest has many secrets," the figure continued. "Secrets both beautiful and terrifying. The creature that hunts is a guardian, a protector, corrupted by an imbalance. It sees itself as merely preserving the balance. Whether it survives or not depends upon the balance of the world." The figure paused, then looked at Eldar. "You are at a crossroads. You can return to your cabin, to your simple life, and allow the cub to meet its fate. Or you can come with me, and learn the truth, and perhaps find a way to restore balance." The choice hung in the air, heavy with the weight of what he was leaving behind, and the unknown horrors that awaited. Eldar felt a surge of protectiveness for the cub, a desperate need to understand and fix things. He knew he had to find a way to save it. After a moment of thought, Eldar took a deep breath and responded, "I will come with you." The figure nodded, its shadowy face seeming to smile, and its eyes glowed even brighter. "Then follow me," it said, its form beginning to fade, blending into the shadows of the trees. "The path is long and dangerous, but the reward, if you survive, may be worth it." And with that, the figure turned and moved, and the woods welcomed Eldar in. The shadows of the woods were now moving, leading Eldar toward the unknown. Eldar followed the figure, his heart racing with anticipation and fear. The forest seemed to be shifting around him, the trees becoming taller and the shadows deeper. He stumbled, his foot catching on a hidden root, and the figure turned to him. "Be careful, Eldar," it said, its voice low and warning. "The path is treacherous, and the darkness is full of dangers." Eldar nodded, his eyes adjusting to the dim light. He could see the figure more clearly now, its form still indistinct, but its presence unmistakable. It was leading him deeper into the forest, further from the cabin and the cub. As they walked, the trees grew closer together, their branches tangling overhead to form a canopy of leaves and shadows. Eldar felt like he was being swallowed by the forest, consumed by its secrets and mysteries. The figure stopped suddenly, its form blurring as it turned to face him. "We are here," it said, its voice barely above a whisper. Eldar looked around, but he couldn't see anything. The forest seemed to be holding its breath, the trees standing motionless and silent. And then he saw it, a glade, hidden away in the heart of the forest. The glade was filled with a soft, ethereal light, a glow that seemed to emanate from the trees themselves. Eldar felt a sense of wonder, his heart filling with awe and curiosity. The figure turned to him, its eyes glinting with an otherworldly light. "This is the Heartwood," it said, its voice full of reverence. "A place of ancient power, where the secrets of the forest are kept." Eldar stepped forward, his feet sinking into the soft earth. The glade was filled with strange and wondrous things. Trees with trunks that shone like silver, flowers that bloomed with an inner light, and creatures that seemed to be made of the very shadows themselves. The figure led him to the center of the glade, where a massive tree stood, its trunk glowing with an intense, pulsing light. Eldar felt a sense of energy emanating from the tree, a power that seemed to be calling to him. "This is the tree of knowledge," the figure said, its voice full of awe. "A tree that holds the secrets of the forest, and the key to unlocking the mysteries of the universe." Eldar reached out a hand, his fingers touching the trunk of the tree. As he did, he felt a surge of energy flow through him, a flood of images and sensations that threatened to overwhelm him. He saw the forest, stretching out before him like a vast, green sea. He saw the creatures that lived within it, the birds and the beasts, the insects and the plants. He saw the web of life that bound them all together, the intricate network of relationships and dependencies. And he saw the darkness, the shadow that threatened to consume them all. He saw the creature that hunted, its form twisted and corrupted, its heart filled with a malevolent intent. Eldar pulled his hand back, his mind reeling with the visions he had seen. The figure turned to him, its eyes glinting with a knowing light. "You have seen the truth," it said, its voice low and serious. "The forest is a balance of light and darkness, of life and death. And you, Eldar, are a part of that balance." Eldar nodded, his heart heavy with the weight of what he had seen. He knew that he had to make a choice, to decide whether to stand with the light, or to succumb to the darkness. The figure turned to him, its form blurring as it spoke. "The choice is yours, Eldar. But know this, the consequences of your decision will be far-reaching, and the fate of the forest will depend on it." And with that, the figure vanished, leaving Eldar alone in the heartwood, surrounded by the secrets and mysteries of the forest. The glade was silent, the trees standing motionless and still. Eldar stood there, his heart pounding with anticipation, his mind racing with the weight of his decision. As he stood there, he felt a presence behind him. He turned to see a figure emerging from the trees, its form indistinct, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. "Who are you?" Eldar asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The figure didn't respond, but instead, it reached out a hand and touched Eldar's forehead. Eldar felt a surge of energy flow through him, a flood of images and sensations that threatened to overwhelm him. He saw the forest, stretching out before him like a vast, green sea. He saw the creatures that lived within it, the birds and the beasts, the insects and the plants. He saw the web of life that bound them all together, the intricate network of relationships and dependencies. And he saw the darkness, the shadow that threatened to consume them all. He saw the creature that hunted, its form twisted and corrupted, its heart filled with a malevolent intent. Eldar pulled back, his mind reeling with the visions he had seen. The figure turned to him, its eyes glinting with a knowing light. "You have seen the truth," it said, its voice low and serious. "The forest is a balance of light and darkness, of life and death. And you, Eldar, are a part of that balance." Eldar nodded, his heart heavy with the weight of what he had seen. He knew that he had to make a choice, to decide whether to stand with the light, or to succumb to the darkness. The figure turned to him, its form blurring as it spoke. "The choice is yours, Eldar. But know this, the consequences of your decision will be far-reaching, and the fate of the forest will depend on it." And with that, the figure vanished, leaving Eldar alone in the heartwood, surrounded by the secrets and mysteries of the forest. The glade was silent, the trees standing motionless and still. Eldar stood there, his heart pounding with anticipation, his mind racing with the weight of his decision. As he stood there, he felt a sense of clarity, a sense of purpose. He knew what he had to do, and he knew that he would have to face the consequences of his decision. With a newfound sense of determination, Eldar turned to leave the heartwood, ready to face whatever lay ahead. The forest seemed to be waiting for him, its secrets and mysteries still hidden, but its power and magic coursing through his veins. As he walked away from the heartwood, Eldar felt a sense of peace, a sense of belonging. He knew that he was a part of the forest, and that the forest was a part of him. He knew that he would always be connected to the land, to the creatures that lived within it, and to the magic that flowed through it. And with that knowledge, Eldar disappeared into the trees, ready to face whatever lay ahead, armed with the power and magic of the forest. The weight of the Heartwood's revelations settled upon Eldar. The visions, the fragmented truths, the unsettling feeling of being a piece in a vast ancient game. It was all a burden he bore now, etched into his very soul. He left the shimmering glade, the energy still humming in his veins, the memory of the faceless figure's words echoing in his mind. He had a choice to make, a path to tread. But first, he had to find the path. He moved swiftly through the woods, the shadows of the trees now familiar companions rather than threats. He knew, somehow, that the forest itself was testing him, pushing him to a breaking point. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, seemed to be a whisper, a challenge, a reminder of the darkness he had to confront. He returned to the clearing where he had initially found the figure, seeking a sign, a direction. The air here felt different, the ground cold, almost unnatural. He closed his eyes and focused, reaching out with his senses, trying to tap into the residual energy of the encounter. He felt a tug, a pull, a faint echo of the figure's presence. It wasn't a physical sensation, but a resonance, a vibration in the very fabric of the forest. It led him east, deeper into the wilds, towards a range of jagged mountains that he knew were called the Shadow Peaks. He began to journey in that direction, his pace quickening as he moved. He felt different, like he was not the same person he had been just hours before. He had a mission, to stop the evil, to protect the cub. He stopped, his ears pricked, and he looked around. He could feel the entity near. He had never encountered this kind of evil before, but he could feel its malevolence. He started to move, determined to find it and to confront it. He knew that it was coming for him, and he knew that if it were successful, the cub would be in danger. As he traversed the forest, he found himself in a place he had never seen before. The trees were twisted, the earth was dark, and the air was thick. The closer he got, the more intense the sensation of the darkness. He heard a sound, the rasp of claws on stone. It was faint, but it sent a shiver down his spine. He knew the creature was nearby. He drew the stone from his pocket, its familiar weight offering a small comfort. He moved slowly and cautiously, his senses on high alert. The forest was silent, the only sounds his own ragged breaths and the beating of his heart. He could feel the gaze, the presence of something evil, fixed upon him. He came to a small ravine. He peered over the edge, and there it was, a creature half-formed, a shifting mass of shadow and claw. Its eyes burned with an unholy light, and it hissed at him, a sound that scraped against his very soul. The creature was larger than he had imagined, its form constantly shifting, its edges blurred like a painting left out in the rain. It was a nightmare made flesh, a manifestation of pure, unadulterated malice. It turned its head slowly, its burning eyes locking onto his. A low growl rumbled from its chest, a sound that seemed to vibrate through the very ground beneath his feet. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced his resolve, but he stood his ground. He couldn't run. He wouldn't. He raised the stone, focusing his will, drawing on the energy of the Heartwood. He spoke, his voice surprisingly strong. "I will not let you hurt the cub." The creature lunged. The battle had begun.